your pride. Show me your greatness.
Saturn plebs, we're really out here with another video, and today we've got the video review finally of Patrick Hoban's Road of the Pleb, as I like to call it. So the way the book is laid out, it's very academic in its nature. I guess that comes from Patrick Hoban's own personal life. He's a political scientist, I believe, so you know it will be very academic in some cases. Most Yu-Gi-Oh players struggle to understand what targeting is, never mind a whole book dedicated to being good. But I think for the most part, you know, like it's very easy to read. There's a lot of parts that I thought were really good and really simple, despite like how technical the game can get at points. I think that's like my initial thoughts, really. I think overall it was really good. I think that there was some parts that needed more work, but you know, I'll talk about that as we go on. So I guess starting off with point number one here, we have the contents page. The way this thing is structured is so there's multiple like different subsections, but the main way this thing is laid out is you have the framework, building blocks, the circle, which is like your friends and stuff like that, the technical play, mental game, deck building, meta games, and then the conclusion. So as you can see, it's chronologically, I think, laid out as well as it should be, I think, for this kind of thing. The framework, essentially, for those of you who have have read Patrick Chaplin's, I think his name, Chaplin. We're just gonna call him Magic Pat, okay? So Magic Pat's theory on the theory of everything is something that he puts forward in his book, Next Level Magic. And basically, Magic Pat says that there's 3 different aspects to a game of Magic. So really, the entire basis of Patrick Hoban's book comes from critiquing Magic Pat's, I guess, his own hypothesis, right? Because Hoban comes up with what you coins the theory of influence. So the theory of influence is basically 4 different breakdowns of how a deck should be played. I just wanted to this is probably going to be the bulkiest section I have of this video review, because it's important to understand, like, this is his hypothesis and this is his abstract, and going forward, like, the entire book is there to prove his hypothesis is an abstract. And I think it's important, therefore, to make very clear what his hypothesis in abstract actually is. So what he actually defines as the theory of influence is, in a tournament, players within a system of rules make choices that dictate the outcome of the tournament, developing more and better choices by manipulating the factors influencing the outcome of the tournament with respect to the system of rules, the hierarchical tournament structure, and limited control an individual can exert is influenced by an individual's play, the other people's play, he says, the individual's deck, and the other player's deck. So studying, exploiting, and improving upon properties of these 4 areas that we influence are all just parts of the same thing, the option to play the tournament. Like, very simply, the 4 areas of play, again, just to really break it down for you, is the 4 areas of influence that you can exert as a player is number 1, technical play, number 2, the mental game, number 3, deck building, and number 4, the meta game. This is essentially the main bulk of the first section, so I just wanted to make that very clear because it sets the foundations for the rest of the entire book. He basically takes these 4 aspects that make up his hypothesis of the theory of influence and breaks it down throughout the rest of the book, and essentially it kind of is sort of based on a critique off of Magic Pat's theory of everything. So the second section we're going to be talking about here, I'm not going to spend too much on it because, you know, you should read the book for yourself. We have something called the building blocks. Now, the building blocks is divided into 4 subsections, I believe. So you have decision-making toolkit. So this means things like your actual way you think as a human being. That's another thing I really liked about this book, is that this section particularly helps you understand your own brain better, even outside of Yu-Gi-Oh, because of the fact that you're able to like take into consideration things like the next section, biases and misjudgment. You know, there's a huge list of biases and judgments that you make as a player without realizing. For example, you might have some sort of personal affinity with a card or a combo or something like that. These are all kinds of things that can, you know, influence you and give you biases. So the next section talks about the circle, and this section essentially is, you know, breaking down what kind of people you should have in your testing circle. It talks about the many problems of having friends in Yu-Gi-Oh that are there that you hold as friends, and people that you have as acquaintances that help you, you know, play the game. Now, there's nothing wrong with having friends in Yu-Gi-Oh, but the idea is that when you have a specific testing circle, you're coming together for the sole purpose of, you know, building decks together, building upon ideas and hypotheses together, and then taking this to a tournament to do well. Some people will not help you achieve that goal. Like, some people you might be best friends with might not be good additions to your circle. This is one of the many problems that Patrick Hoban himself encountered, and this is some of the examples that he gives personally, to help you influence how you go forward and build your circle. The next section is technical play. Now, technical play, again, this takes into consideration some of Magic Pat's ideas, I guess you could call them, when he talks about things like tempo, philosophy of fire. These are all very, Magic-oriented terms, but Patrick does a really good job of breaking down everything. There's really good examples in here where he talks about, for example, this Magic article known as Who is the Beatdown? And this makes up a lot of the big portion of the technical play aspect of Patrick's book. It's actually very small. I was personally a little bit disappointed in the technical play section, which is one of my issues I had with it because of the fact that obviously Patrick Hoban is someone who values deck building much more than being a better player. Obviously he believes that if you have a better deck, it doesn't matter how good you are, as long as you play somewhat semi-competently, you're going to beat your opponent just because you simply have a better deck. If I take Necros and play against Glad Beasts, I don't need to be much better than someone who plays Glad Beast because I have fucking Necros, do you know what I mean? But I digress. So the deck building section talks primarily about, understanding very basic things, which I think is good because, it's very basic. He has like some diagrams, which you might have seen some pictures of, and it's like, summon bear or don't summon bear. Summon Cyber Dragon, don't summon Cyber Dragon. It starts off very simply, and then it starts talking about order of operations, how you take these things into consideration, how you decide how you summon a monster, whether you should be, what to play around, how to read. These are all important things, and it talks about what I consider very, very important. Something that was very eye-opening to me was the Magic article. I forgot the name of the author. When it talks about, and this is kind of all pretty much like a big extrapolation upon this concept of who is the beatdown. Very basic sort of things that really help you put into perspective how to play a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And how to actually be good at it, rather than just, simply saying like, let me just throw all my cards on the table. But like I said, the section does a good job of, explaining technical play, I think, to a pretty full potential. So the next section is the mental game. Now, again, this is all very simple stuff, like, well, I wouldn't say simple because it does get a bit complex, but it's, Patrick talks about gauging the opponent. So, for example, you need to play around certain things against certain players. A very, very good player isn't going to be playing, Mirror Forces in a format where Mirror Force is bad. A really good player isn't going to Magic Cylinder you, for example. So you need to be able to play your cards in a certain way that help you beat an opponent depending on how good your opponent is. If you're in the early rounds of a tournament and, you've gauged your opponent to be of a, relatively average to below average skill level, you have to adapt your play to that. And that's really the main point of the first section of the mental game. And then from there, it just goes forward talking about learning to read properly. I don't mean like reading books, I mean like, actually like understanding your opponent's cards. And then it talks about the art of persuasion, so persuading your opponent to make plays, bluffing, and convincing them to make incorrect plays and such and such. Deck building, there's so much in here, and I don't want to really talk about it too much because of the fact that I don't want to spoil the book, because if you want to see deck building, I can promise you that it's a very impressive section. There's a lot of effort put into this. It clearly talks a lot about, how he feels that deck building is very important and how much more important than other aspects of Yu-Gi-Oh! Talks about things like, curves in decks, when it comes to actually learning cards, learning decks, when it comes to diminishing returns with regards to your, ratios of card choices. One thing that particularly stuck out at me, for example, was the idea of variance. So the idea of variance is the fact that, he gives a very good example with like Brilliant Fusion, so you play 3 Brilliant Fusion because 3 cards in your deck means you have quite a high chance of drawing this card and seeing it, but you also have a smaller chance of seeing this complete dead draw card that completely destroy your hand, in the form of Garnet, for example. So it talks about how when going into tournaments, you can use things like variance to your example. So, people always complain about, I got sacked by this card, but it's like we also, as players, based on the, the biases and judgment section at the start, we forget about times where we sacked our opponent, and it's like, well, we can use sacky sort of engines in our deck to really give us an edge in a tournament, because, sure, we might open Garnet a few games in a tournament, But if we consistently open Brilliant Fusion more than we really should have, that can give you an edge. So when it comes to deck building, one of the things I personally found very thought-provoking in his deck building section was the idea that you can use variants to your advantage. So you can play like some degree of like quirky, crazy combos in the hopes that, you just simply have to just get lucky for more rounds than you shouldn't get lucky for. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's one good way that lets you think about deck building, is by embracing something like variants rather than complaining about it, like, which is something very easy for us to do as players. We complain about getting sacked by this or that. It's like, well, we could build our deck to incorporate sack cards, that could potentially give us an edge across the whole tournament based on the percentages. So the final section is talking about the metagame. I felt that this section was particularly a little bit more advanced for when the points where you personally can influence the metagame, but there's obviously so much more important stuff here for even you as a player. And it's basically, it comes down to, someone wins a big tournament, you can play around that certain deck, you can build your deck around that deck, you can build that deck, and it's just like talking about how you can take these shifts in the metagame to your advantage, use them to counter the metagame, or to use the metagame, or to simply just, play the metagame. There's different ways in which constant shifts in the metagame. And basically, this whole section talks about how you can use these in tournament strategies. But like I said, I don't want to get too much into it because this is, just a review, not really, an actual explanation. But I feel like a lot of what I said so far has been very important. So I think this has been, the full video review. I think I've done this as much justice as I could. But yeah, what are my overall conclusory thoughts on it? Well, like I said, I think the book is very, very well made. It's structured very well. It's clearly, had a lot of effort put into some sections and others, which I think is kind of problematic in some cases. But generally, I think it's done very well. I think it's made very well. Editing was garbage, not gonna lie. A lot of spelling mistakes. Some sentences don't make sense. So I think that's it for the most of the structure. So in terms of the content was, pretty fantastic. I'd say that technical play section, while short and sweet, sort of, it still did its job, I think. Deck building, of course, very expansive, very, very huge, long section. Details everything very well. Talks about all the different concepts when it comes to building decks, when it comes to like ratios. I think was explained very well. Metagame section, of course, very important in understanding how a meta develops and what you should expect going into a tournament, and what you need to plan around, what you need to think about and consider when you go into a tournament. All very important things. And overall, I thought it was really good. Why should you buy this book? Well, in his own words, the road of the king isn't one that's concerned with sitting on the throne once we get there, but rather the process of expanding our kingdom. So this book is, in its intention, is to not just help you get good at the game, but once you get to the throne, as you call it, once you get to the very top, once you become a very good, comfortable level, you're able to take your game to the absolute fullest, maximum potential, and really expand on your kingdom, as the metaphor goes, or really as how I would define this, as, simply just getting the best out of all your knowledge, everything you've learned, and being able to just use all these different things to your advantage, and be able to just keep progressing, keep getting better, keep having the motivation to go as far as you can. But yeah, overall, I think that, I think it was very good. I think all the criticisms I have are pretty justified. There's nothing really too much. But overall, like I said, I think this I keep saying deck, this book is very good. And I would honestly recommend it, and I think, you should give this a read. It's not that expensive at all, at least here in the UK. It's like, £13 or something. It's definitely worth it. It's a whole book, compendium of 10 years worth of knowledge. It's definitely worth a purchase. So I would definitely pick it up. Trade for it at least or something, you know what I mean? But yeah, so this has been my video review. If you've watched this far, give me hashtag Road of the Pleb in the description so I know you've watched this far. Other than that, yeah, there's just one final question that just has not been answered. But how did he make chain?